Well, it's here. We have facts, we have figures, we have numbers, we have pictures, we have designs, we have schematics. We can now talk about it. We can now talk about it in depth. So what do you get? You get 2 turrets with 2 size 7s apiece. You get 2 remote turrets where it's also implied that you can automate them. So those have 2 size 3s apiece. And then you have 20 torpedoes. 20 torpedoes. Size 5. Now, some of you might think that that's kind of a bad thing. That's actually not a bad thing. We'll get into that in a little bit. But overall, the armament, some people might look at it and say, oh, the turrets that are meant to defend it, the 2 turrets with the size 3s, that they aren't that good. You have to remember that while this ship's speed might seem a little bit limited at 92 meters a second, at the upper end of things, it's kind of SCM speed, which really, its actual speed, its full-on balls-to-the-wall speed is probably going to be something around 700 to 800, possibly touching 900 meters a second when you're just going all out. And, once again, we are talking about a universe with Newtonian physics, so that is probably a more relevant number than SCM speed, because SCM speed is proving to be, unfortunately, kind of like a dream, an idealized version of Star Citizen, and really not a lot of things are going to be happening at SCM speed. Let's be real. So let's move on to the actual ship. What do you get with this ship? Now, one of the things that the ship heavily implies, because there are images of it, is that it can land on a planet and it can carry a small rover. That's kind of cool. And that's kind of a good idea, because that opens up doors. Now, the cargo space is 50 SCU, but that is interchangeable with the vehicle from all outward appearances. Now, there are some design changes that I would recommend to this ship, heavily, in fact, which could open up a little bit more cargo space or a little bit more crew space, a little bit more engineering space in the ship, but we'll get to that in a minute. Overall, yes, you do have access to planets. You do have access to moons. You can carry a ground vehicle. So there's some cool exploration possibilities. And I think that this is really something that when CIG is trying to create their kind of rock, paper, scissors matrix of ships, this is better than that and that's better than this. I think that in terms of limiting what ships can do in terms of landing on a planet or, the range that they can travel in space, they really kind of lose touch with the idea of that this is like a space exploration game at its heart. And this is a ship that kind of seems to fulfill that promise with a large quantum drive, large fuel tank. This opens up a lot of doors to really explore the Star Citizen universe and travel through it, which is something that I feel that even in the earliest days when CIG was talking about what they wanted the game to be and how they wanted the game to play, they leaned a little too heavy on those limitations. But overall, it's a fairly solid package of a ship. And the doors that it opens for you are pretty solid. The interior spaces are pretty well designed from what we can see, and of course this is pre-white box. A lot of this stuff has to be worked out. This is just a general kind of napkin math style design of the interior. It is not finalized. This is not a flight ready ship, clearly, unfortunately too, but that's not really a bad thing, because some of you might say like, oh, I wanted it to be flight ready. There's a few things that CIG can kind of fix between now and flight ready that would really kind of improve this ship. And unfortunately, we're going to talk about one of these problems because it's kind of shown in this image here. We're going to talk about this a little bit, and that is the turret layout. Now look at this image here, right? This is the ship landed. It's got a ground vehicle. Cool. Everything's great. Where's the bottom turret? Where is it? It's not in the picture, but we just saw it. It's on the bottom of the ship, just to the rear of the cargo bay. Where is it? Well, I think that it's clearly implied that the bottom turret fully retracts up into the body of the ship. I think that that's kind of a given. So in a way, you might think like, okay, that's a really cool design idea, and the turret goes and it pops out, and little doors open, and we can animate it, and it looks really cool. The problem is that having that turret underneath the ship and to the rear of the ship is going to present the pilot or captain or both with a pretty unique geometry problem. Every time you want to engage a target, you're going to have to align your ship in such a way that you can hopefully bring both of those turrets to bear. And having them placed where they are creates kind of an issue with that. Gun depression, being able to fire off certain angles. You got those little winglets hanging off the side because aerodynamics. That's going to present kind of a running problem. It's going to be something that, if you've ever used the rear turret, or in fact the only turret on a Freelancer, if you've ever tried to use that and tried to cooperate with the pilot in combat, you'll know exactly the problem that I'm talking about. Unfortunately, it seems that CIG is kind of goofed with turret placement. Ideally, if you wanted one on the top and one on the bottom, you would have actually kind of created an engineering space within the ship where the mount for the turret is just a tube that goes from the top to the bottom. And so the underside turret would also be on the front of the ship, and you would just kind of widen the hull a bit at the bottom, and you would put them both so that whatever way the ship is facing, where the pilot is looking, the turrets can engage cooperatively. There's enough gun depression there that they can easily cover each other's field of fire and kind of, work together. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist. So you have kind of a geometry problem, and not always a solvable geometry problem when you're engaging in combat and you're hoping to bring both turrets to bear. That may not always be an issue, but certainly if you have kind of sat in the turret of a Freelancer, you know exactly the problem that I'm talking about. And if you've sat in the rear turret of a Hammerhead and other people have been engaging and you just haven't been able to engage because of where you're placed, you're going to know exactly the kind of the experience that I'm talking about here. So that is kind of a big issue right there. That is kind of you could even technically move that forward turret ahead a little bit and then kind of stagger the turrets and put one up a little bit above the other and put them right at the top, at the front of the hull, kind of in that classic World War II battleship design. And that would be a lot easier to work with. It would create obviously some limitations, but it would also, I think, create some unique opportunities. And that way the pilot and the turret gunners, everyone is kind of looking in the same direction, and it makes it a lot easier to orientate the ship for combat. Because remember, we're talking about Newtonian physics here. You can always just decouple the ship and bring everything to bear quite easily. So the idea of, we got to cover all the angles really isn't as true as a lot of people like to think that it is. Now, another thing that I kind of disagree with, but we can kind of wait and see on this, is the idea of only two turrets that have the two size 3s, the remote turrets. That should probably be, depending on where they're placed and exactly how their fields of fire, I would actually argue that those should probably be quad turrets at the very least. And not so much for defense against fighters, though obviously that's a thing. For defense against torpedoes. Torpedoes are going to be a real concern in this ship. And that has to be said. Because if you're thinking about even the size 5 torpedoes that this thing carries, you're talking about anywhere from 1050 meters a second to 1150 meters a second. So those torpedoes are easily going to be able to overtake you. And those are just the torpedoes that you are able to carry. So that's something that you might see on a Harbinger. Now, it's going to take quite a few, but you can see how it wouldn't be that difficult to put together a concerted effort to overwhelm you with torpedoes with those piddly little turrets. There should be more of them, and they should be better armed. That is kind of an issue. Another issue is the fact that even if you go all the way up to a Retaliator, the Class 9 torpedoes are a little bit slower, but not slow enough. So a couple of Retaliators could probably wreck this ship. And when you're talking about $675 worth of spaceship, you don't demand and expect a commanding advantage over every other player who's spent less money than you. That's unfair, and that would be pay to win. But I would say that properly equipped and properly spec'd out, you should expect a fighting chance to win. Right now, I would say easily that if you're known to be lurking about in the ship and your enemy can scrape together 3 retaliators, you're dead. And they're going to be able to hit you probably well beyond your effective range with those size 7 turrets. And by the time those torpedoes get into range of those size 3 turrets, you've only got 2 of them. That's not a lot of firepower. You're not going to stop all those torpedoes. There's no way. So that is kind of an issue with this ship. If there was specific point defense turrets on this ship that were specifically made to engage torpedoes or missiles, and there was a few of them on top of the turrets that are already there, that would be a lot more interesting. That would be a lot cooler. But the problem is right now, looking at this ship, there are certainly some strong possibilities here. And I don't want to detract from the ship. There are some strong possibilities here. But the fact of the matter is that if you're operating the ship and you're operating in a place where you might get engaged with other players and they know that you're doing this, the second you see a retaliator on your scanner, that's when you ought to be spooling up your quantum drive and getting ready to get the hell out of Dodge, because that is not something that you want to deal with ever. This thing has a lot of strengths, and we're going to be talking about some of that, but it is torpedo bait. Big time torpedo bait. Now, when CIG kind of creates images like this, they kind of create these sizzling images of the ship streaking into combat and just like blasting away at people and, taking them down and all this stuff like that, and getting into close combat and ramming a hammerhead in half. A ship like this, we've talked about some of the limitations of the turret, but a ship like this is not something that you're going to be engaging people with at point blank range. Where those issues aren't really going to matter is at much larger distances. And remember, those are size 7 guns, so those are probably going to have some serious range. And those are size 5 torpedoes, which means I believe currently size 5 torpedoes you can fire out to about 11 or 12 kilometers away. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, but I believe that that's kind of the engagement range. And I feel that with the right guns paired with the right torpedoes is that you can actually deliver some very devastating damage to ships that are, kind of at that range. And you can present a limited target. You can be in a position where you can bring a lot of that firepower to bear. That's also one of the reasons firing the torpedoes out of the front. It's kind of one of the reasons why I'd also like to see that rearward turret move to the front so you can bring all of that firepower to bear. But even with the singular turret, you have to remember that those torpedoes are there. So that kind of, at range, that kind of covers some of my issues with this ship. The defense guns, still kind of a problem, but, it's not an unsolvable problem. Certainly not. CIG likes to create these images, all the guns blazing. We're showing you everything. You can get in there and hit. But remember that this is probably something that's going to work better at range. This is designed to be a raider, which kind of makes it not so much an interesting vessel for strictly military patrols. I think that the Polaris would probably be better in that respect, but because this thing is gun-based and its torpedoes aren't all that hard-hitting as the Polaris's is, it feels to me that this is actually a ship that is better suited to supplying the firepower needed to a raiding group to bring down larger commercial-based opponents. So your Hull Ds, your Hull Es, things like that. This is an ideal ship to get in and sit at range and basically cripple these ships after they've been kind of tackled, or they're in a position where maybe they're unable to quantum one way or another. This is a great ship for staying at range and just picking people off and then getting the hell out of Dodge. It's not a particularly fast ship, but it is probably quick enough that it can maintain that range long enough that it can escape if it needs to. And so it kind of makes it a bit of an ideal pirate ship. You know, one of the things that I really liked about the Nautilus was the size 7 guns. Remember, size 7 guns are something that we haven't seen in game yet. But you have to assume that those are going to have some pretty long reach with them. So it's possible that you could disable or cripple ships from long range, especially when they're out in a place where they can't quantum. That gives you some reach into some pretty large commercial ships. So that means that you could raid some significant cargoes with a ship like this. Pairing it up with interdiction vessels that are built to be very resilient, you could see how a ship like this could easily tear down a medium-sized commercial opponent and allow you to kind of steal that cargo. It's kind of the perfect pirate ship. It has its limitations, yes, but it is kind of built around the idea of, you know, when we're talking about the Torpedoes. If you're the kind of pilot who's going to sit there and say, hey, here I am at Olisar, taking on everyone, come and get me, just bought myself a Perseus, now I'm ready to just take everybody on. If you're that type of pilot, you're going to die a lot, and you're going to die pretty quickly. But if you're able to kind of use this well and use this smartly and stab in and out of combat and not sit in one place at one time and allow people to say, hey, there's a Perseus over there, let's all rally together, get in our torpedo bombers and go after him. If you're smart enough to avoid that situation, which it shouldn't be that difficult to do, and you got a good head on your shoulders, and you know what the limitations of your ship are, but you know what its advantages are, and you can kind of steer clear of the limitations and steer towards your strengths, this could be a very ideal ship. I like this ship. I really, really do. I haven't mentioned its limitations right at the outset, because I wanted to get that out of the way first. But this is a very strong ship for raiding other ships, and especially commercial opponents are going to be exceedingly vulnerable to this ship. So I kind of like it for those reasons. You know, like it says in the brochure, taking on 2 Vandal destroyers, blah, blah, blah. You know, okay, well, calm down, hero, but you can easily see how a ship like this, you know, paired with a really smart crew, could easily tear down Orions, Reclaimers, things like that, steal their cargo. Faster ships like the Caterpillar could probably escape from it, but you'd have to be running by the time this thing showed up, because those torpedoes would rip into you quite easily. You got to remember, size 5 torpedoes, you're talking about 1,100-ish meters a second, 10-kilometer firing range, roughly. You're not going to outrun those torpedoes very quickly in a Caterpillar. So once this thing arrives, you'd pretty much have to already be moving at full clip or just about to quantum out. Another good thing about this ship is it has a large quantum drive, large quantum fuel tank, right? So that means this ship has legs, and that's one of the things that you really have to talk about in Star Citizen is distance and time. Because I think that CIG was unfortunately a little bit stingy when they kind of came up with their idea of what the range of ships was going to be in Star Citizen, and that unfortunately kind of created more problems for ships that already have realistically some heavy duty problems to contend with in terms of usability in the Star Citizen universe. This is a ship that kind of trumps all of that. It kind of goes beyond that, and it says, hey, you know what, you get into me, you can travel across the universe. Now, of course, you're going to have to stop for fuel, probably every other star system, but this is going to give you a lot more reach than many other ships that are going to be like, gotta stop for gas, gotta stop for gas, gotta stop for gas. This is where you get into the region of starships that really open up the universe to you, and that's why when you hear me kind of saying some of the things that I say about fighters, I like to remind people the fact that Star Citizen just isn't Port Olisar. Star Citizen isn't Lorville. Star Citizen is supposed to be this vast universe and these vast distances that you're going to have to cross, and that's where I think a lot of people we've talked a lot about the limitations of fighters, but I think that's where it's going to break a lot of people, and they're going to start moving towards the bigger and bigger ships, especially the soloable ones. Now, is this a soloable ship? We'll get to that. But as a ship to explore the Star Citizen universe, it is kind of ideally placed. And I really like that about this ship, because you have to think about it in traditional sword and board MMO terms. It's like, imagine if you got to choose between two characters and one character could only stay in the beginner area, and it would take forever to get to, the next zone or the next zone. Whereas this other character already comes with a mount and can quickly travel all around the world and do whatever it wants. Like, if you think about it in sort of like classic WoW terms, it's the difference between, like, let's say, not having a mount to level 40 and having a mount right away at level 1, and the doors and the possibilities and the enjoyability of the experience that it opens up for you. That's what this is going to be like. And so you're going to see a lot of players who are going to get sick and tired of walking everywhere, and they're going to be like, I want to mount up, and they're going to move into ships in this kind of size field, these ships that open up a lot more possibilities. And so you're very quickly going to see fighters become kind of like expensive dust collectors in people's hangars, and they're going to be looking at ships like this realistically. So I like that about this ship. It's a ship that opens doors. It's not a ship that closes them. Now, is this what I would consider to be a reasonable soloable ship? No, it is not. And you might say, well, Minion, that can't be, because you've looked at the Caterpillar and you said that the Caterpillar could be reasonably soloable. Yes, because the Caterpillar's turrets are mainly there for defense. And so putting a couple of NPCs in those turrets and, giving them revenants to use and just, shoot up any of the little fighters that might try to come and take your cargo, LOL, is not unreasonable to expect. But I think that when you get to this layer of complexity, I think you transition to a point where you really can't effectively solo in a ship like this. There's going to be so much going on in terms of guns, torpedoes, positioning, radar, electronic warfare, internal ship systems. There's enough complex duties on a ship like this that I think that you do move into the area where you're going to want to have a few players on board on this ship and to manage those tasks for you, because I could easily see it as as someone who would solo a large number of ships, and I think that there's a large number of ships out there that could be soloed in the medium to small range. This is kind of one of those ships that I think it kind of transitions a threshold of complexity of gameplay where a solo player would easily be overwhelmed by all the tasks that are facing them. We don't really know what the bridge layout is. Is the captain also the pilot? Is the pilot, also in charge of this and that? We don't know what the breakdown of duties is aboard this ship. I would assume that the captain is also the pilot because it's only a 6-man crew, but you really don't know, right? You really don't know. One person for engineering, one person for communications or electronics, 2 people for the turrets. That's kind of 4. What the bridge duties are and how they're going to break down, that's a little bit up in the air. That still gives you like 3 seats there to fill. A pilot, a co-pilot, and a captain, perhaps. Who knows? Like, this is where I feel that you do transition into the point where you would want another player aboard. This is more of a team night ship than it is like a solo everyday flyer. That's how I would break this thing down. This is definitely in the realm of not recommended to try and solo it. There may be some tryhards out there who are going to be like, I can solo anything. Sure. Okay, and there may be some limited cases where some player, through voice commands and all kinds of stuff, and through some incredible layer of complexity and some matrix of software and NPC crew, is going to be able to pull this off, but this is not going to be an everyday, every single person type thing. So I would say that if you're buying a ship like this and you're thinking NPC crew, no problem. That's a little bit questionable. I really think that that's a little bit questionable. And so I would not buy it on the requirement that I be able to solo it. I would purchase it knowing that I'm probably going to have to bring a few friends along to fully crew and realize the potential of this ship. Now, is it going to be all that difficult of a ship to crew? I don't think so. Because remember, there's going to be a glut of these things that are going to be sold in Star Citizen, right? I think that's kind of obvious. You're probably looking at your org, and if you have 100 plus or 1,000 plus member org, there's probably already 100 of these things out there, Let's be real. But the truth of it is if you've been playing Star Citizen regularly, you'll run into a number of situations where your friends log in, but they don't want to fly their own ships. And they're like, I just want to get into somebody else's turret. And there's a lot of players out there who are currently experiencing Star Citizen from like an Avenger Titan point of view, or an Aurora LN, or a Mustang Alpha point of view. And that's all that they really have, right? There's a lot of people like that out there, and they're going to see ships like this and be like, man, I want to serve on a ship like this. So it's not unreasonable to assume that, yes, you could get the players out there to fully crew your ship. It's just going to require you to delve into that deep, dark world of gamer kryptonite, also known as social interaction. But that's kind of the price you pay. Now, what is the time frame for CIG to deliver a ship like this? That is kind of the $1 million question. Because, as we all know, CIG loves to sell really cool ships, and we just love to wait for years for them to be built. We just love that. Don't we all just love buying Polarises and then just sitting there and going, one day. It's so much better than actually playing the game. It's just like dreaming of what it will be. Unfortunately, it's not flight ready, right? Now, that's kind of a benefit because it allows CIG more time to learn lessons from other ships before they build this ship. So that's kind of a plus. But the downside, of course, is we don't have it. When can we expect it? Now, if you read the brochure, it hints at a battle in the Oberon system, and they refer to, Admiral Bishop, saying, oh no, we need more of these ships because, of what this one did against 2 destroyers in the Oberon system. Oh, well then it's going to be in Squadron 42, so guaranteed they're going to put this thing in almost right away. Hold your horses. The Oberon system, thankfully, we have this handy dandy star map that shows us where all the systems are in Star Citizen currently. The Oberon system is the same distance away from Odin, where Squadron 42 at least starts, as Stanton. It's 4 jumps away. Now, light years, it might be different, but it's basically 4 large jump gates away to get to that system. So you have to figure that it's not directly implied that this is going to be something that's in Squadron 42. It could be, it could not be. So saying that, oh yeah, it's going to be in Squadron 42, so they're going to build it right away, that is not a guarantee, right? That is not a guarantee. And in fact, I think they do mention the fact that it was a ship that was on the outs until the Oberon system, and then Admiral Bishop was like, RSI, make more of these. They're really good. And so they started making more. So it's not exactly guaranteed that it's going to be in Squadron 42, therefore it's going to get put into production quickly. You could be like looking at this ship, reasonably speaking, let's say bare minimum for this ship to be produced. Yes, they do have a little bit of the RSI, kind of toolkit built out. That's true. In terms of like the Constellation, the Auroras, and the Mantis, ships like that. But that's a long way from being in a position, say, like where Drake is to build the Corsair. For Drake, most of it's done. Like Drake has almost everything worked out. Whereas RSI is still a little bit up in the air. And I would argue that if you're saying that the Connie is kind of a proof that, Drake or RSI is almost finished, I would say the Connie is probably the exact opposite of that and is probably going to get yet another revisit in the not too distant future. But let's say ideal perfect scenario. CIG says tomorrow, oh, by the way, it's going into production. Minimum a year before the ship is flyable. Minimum a year, I would assume. That would be the safe bet, that if you bought the ship today, the earliest you could possibly hope to be flying it is this time next year. More than likely, realistically, I would say that the timeline is... if you're buying the ship and you're saying, yeah, it's not going into production today, I would say reasonable expectation is 2 to 3 years for the ship to be completed. 2 to 3 years. If an argument, like if we find out that it is like a featured ship in Squadron 42 and you're going to do a mission on it and it's going to be like, hella fun, and so it's going to be part of Squadron 42, yeah, that kind of pushes it up. But then again, we were supposed to be playing the beta of Squadron 42 like a month ago, right? But things don't always work out the way we would like them to. And Squadron 42, as much as, a lot of people can look to it and say, oh, it's going to be a really great game. Others of us kind of look at Squadron 42 as kind of like Star Citizen's unfortunate parasite that we've had to learn to deal with. It's not exactly harming us, kind of a symbiote at times, but at other times it just drains a lot of resources and we don't know where it's going because we don't get to see a lot of stuff. But hey, we're getting a new roadmap soon and maybe that'll change. No. Realistically, if you're buying the ship, 2 to 3 years before you're flying this ship. I think by the time that we get Pyro online, there's going to be enough stuff going on in Star Citizen that a ship like this could really be justified. But then there are other ships that are kind of ahead of it in terms of priority. If this is a ship that is kind of like universally adopted within the community, like everyone's buying this ship, like this moves up into almost like Cutlass like levels of universal love and praise in terms of Star Citizen, you're going to see this ship moved way up in priority. That's kind of one of the unspoken rules of Star Citizen. The more popular a ship is, the quicker it goes into production, right? One of the things that drove a lot of the Hammerhead's popularity early on is we found out that it was already in production. Now, is that likely to happen with this? I think that this is actually CIG's kind of move to correct a lot of the issues with the Hammerhead. It's not intended to fulfill the role of the Hammerhead, but I think that it is intended to be a much better combat vessel to complement the Hammerhead. So you might see it a lot sooner rather than, 6 or 8 years down the road. But as to when, there's nothing here that I can point to and say that this, based on this and this, I can say that it's probably going to fall in here. I would say, honestly, if you are buying this ship, plan on a 2 to 3 year wait. But, for Banu Merchantman pilots, they'll say, oh, really? Only 2 to 3 years? You're cute. So, know what you're getting into when you lay down the cash. If you're just melting into it to just have it and then see what happens, yeah, you know what? You might say, hey, but I don't get LTI. But then again, 120 months of in-game playtime. I recently did a slash played on my most played WoW character, and that was only 247 days and 15 years. So 120 months of in-game playtime is a lot for just basic level non-LTI insurance. So overall, net, what do I think of this ship? If you're the type of pilot who has no problem picking up a few friends and associating with a few people to get them together and fly on your ship, if you can maintain that type of social circle, and doesn't have to be a big one. Remember, this is a 6-person max crew ship. Then I think this is not a bad idea. If you're the type of pilot that is nimble on their feet, that doesn't stick around too long, that doesn't kind of, broadcast ridiculous comments in local in hopes of, enraging all the players and bringing them out to find you. If you're the type of player who's nimble on their feet, who's quick, who's discreet, who knows how to get around in a star system, and who wants the entire universe opened up to them as much as possible, who wants a hard-hitting ship that, when used correctly, can do some serious damage, but knows the difference between the situations you can handle and the situations that you can handle, or can't handle rather, and knows, and is smart enough to know that, there are times when you have to run. For a pilot like that, then yeah, I think that you are looking down the right roads. If you're a pirate in particular, I think that this is a uniquely good vessel. Some people might say, oh, no, the Hammerhead's good. I would say that this thing easily would just rip a Hammerhead to shreds, because it could easily outrange the Hammerhead and just blast it to pieces. So the arrival of this ship kind of puts the final nail in the coffin of the idea of the Hammerhead being, kind of like this all-arounder gunship to complement the Polaris. The Hammerhead is not entirely useless, and in certain cases, I think that this working in concert with a Hammerhead would be ideal, but if I were forced to choose between the two, I would pick this over the Hammerhead. Would I pick this over something like the Nautilus? Yes. Yes, I would, because the Nautilus it does present some interesting possibilities, but broadly speaking, I think that this ship, along with the Torpedoes, it covers a lot more in terms of combat potential. The Nautilus and the mine laying was interesting. This thing as a raider is much more interesting to me. So that, as a pirate ship, I think that it is uniquely positioned to kind of remind you of your limitations and kind of keep you playing within them, but at the same time opening up some interesting doors and raiding some of the heavier commercial vessels that may be out there. Some people say, well, those ships are always going to travel in convoys. Yeah, well, we'll see about that, So I think that this is going to be a very interesting capital ship. If you're buying it because you think you're going to be taking on javelins and Idrises with it, I don't know about that. But against the weaker, more vulnerable opponents, like, this thing is going to shred them. The only real limitation, the only real question for this ship, the only thing that kind of gives me pause about it is the problem of quantum drive, because the limitations of quantum interdiction as they are in game right now don't really benefit this ship all that much. This ship, I would say, if things were to stay the way they are right now and just move forward, this ship would be probably ideal for hitting commercial ships as they're trying to leave the atmosphere of a planet or a moon, and just taking their engines out and forcing them to crash, and then bringing in your friends to salvage up the cargo. That would be kind of its ideal. There are other uses for it, yes, and certainly you could look at it in terms of raiding, the little mining claim missions and things like that. There are certain possibilities there, as long as those missions get scaled up. There's certain fun possibilities and a lot of fun gameplay that are possible with this. It is certainly not a do anything, go everywhere ship, but like the Cutlass, oddly enough, I think that while it doesn't have a commanding lead in any one field, I think it's, as far as capital ships go, it's just good enough at everything that it could become the Cutlass of capital ships. But, and I want to emphasize this, I really want to emphasize this point as a recommendation, I do not think that this is ever going to be a soloable capital ship. Buy it with the intention of flying it with your friends. That is my recommendation. Anyways, that has been an exhaustive first look at the Perseus. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, because now I got to sit here and watch it render instead of playing Shadowlands. I hope you enjoyed it, and have a fun weekend.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.